Good evening, everyone. Good morning to our viewers in Asia. My name is Heather Exner Pro. I'm coming to you from just outside Calgary on the territory of the Tsuut'ina Nation. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and it's absolutely my pleasure to be moderating this very timely expert briefing on fueling the Indo-Pacific, how hydrogen power could help safeguard energy security in the region. We have an excellent roster of speakers and panelists that we're excited to bring to you today. In May 2021, the foreign ministers of Canada and Japan agreed on 6 areas of bilateral cooperation to advance our common interests, and that included energy security as well as climate change and the environment. And that has really inspired our webinar today. Of course, energy security is very much on the minds of policymakers and observers all across the world today. We've been watching the energy crisis in Europe and Asia unfold over the past several months, which has seen LNG prices spike, has disrupted economies, and has plunged millions into energy poverty. And not least the events of the past 24 hours with Russian aggression in Ukraine, which has highlighted for many of us the geopolitical importance of energy and the need to be very sophisticated in our policies and planning. And here I believe that Japan has some lessons for Canada. But of course, this is also an opportunity to think about how we can advance a successful energy transition, one that is not disruptive or chaotic, but still moves us forward on a path towards net zero carbon emissions. And so I am delighted that we also be talking about the role that Canadian hydrogen might play alongside ammonia and LNG in providing low carbon sources of fuel to our partners in Japan and beyond. Our format today will include opening remarks from His Excellency Ambassador Kawamari Yasuhisa, also followed by Frank DeRosiers, the Assistant Deputy Minister for Natural Resources Canada. We will then move to a keynote speech from the estimable Yamashita Yukari, the Director of the Institute of Energy Economics in Japan. And then we'll have a panel discussion rounded out by some Canadian experts, Jeff Kucharski, a Senior Fellow at Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and Matthew Klippenstein, the Regional Manager for the Canadian Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association. So a wonderful evening to talk all things energy, all things Canada and Japan. To start us off, it's my pleasure to introduce Jonathan Berkshire Miller. He is the director of the Indo-Pacific program and a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and the mastermind behind this webinar. Unfortunately, he's in Europe today and could not join us in person, but he has pre-recorded some opening remarks and some introductions. And so I'll turn it over for his short clip here from Jonathan.
Good evening or morning for friends who are joining us from Asia. And my name is Jonathan Berkshire Miller, and I am Director and Senior Fellow of the Indo-Pacific Program here at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. It's a great pleasure to welcome you for what I'm sure will be another engaging discussion on a crucially important challenge facing Canada and our friends in the Indo-Pacific region. As many of you know, MLI has been placing a good deal of attention on the importance of the Indo-Pacific and its nexus with Canada and our own foreign policy interests. Over the past year, we've hosted events and given a platform to key thought leaders across the region, highlighting the key stakes in the region and outlining the imperative for Canada to bolster its own engagement. Today's session will be focusing on energy security in the Indo-Pacific and its nexus with Canada. And we are delighted to have a top cast of experts here from Canada and Japan, one of our most important partners in the region, to shed light on these issues. Fundamentally, energy security is about ensuring stable, affordable, and sustainable supplies of energy. Maintaining a resilient energy system is of paramount concern to countries that are highly dependent on international markets for energy resources and critical materials needed to sustain their economies. The Indo-Pacific region is expected to have the strongest demand for energy over the next 3 decades, as continued economic growth and growing numbers for people enter middle-class status and increase their energy consumption. However, a range of tensions, rivalries, and grievances are fueling geopolitical competition in the region. In this context, energy and critical resources that underpinned its production are undergoing fundamental changes. Japan and Canada in particular have identified the important areas of cooperation, and energy security is one of these, and is a key pillar for their shared vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific. Today's event, Fueling the Indo-Pacific, How Hydrogen Power Could Safeguard Energy Security in the Region, will look at the broader issue of energy security and highlight the benefit and potential role of just one specific area, cooperation on hydrogen power. On that note, I'd like to proceed to hand the virtual floor to His Excellency Ambassador Kawamari Yasuhisa, Japan's ambassador to Canada, who has graciously agreed to provide some opening remarks before our panel discussion. Before coming to Canada, Ambassador Kawamura served as Ambassador and Deputy Representative of Japan to the United Nations. He has also served in a range of senior roles at Japan's Foreign Ministry, including as Press Secretary and Director General for Press and Public Diplomacy. Ambassador Kawamura is one of Japan's most seasoned diplomats, with several overseas postings in places such as New York, Indonesia, Brussels, and elsewhere. Following Ambassador Kawamura, we are delighted to have Frank Desrosiers, Assistant Deputy Minister from Natural Resources Canada. Before his roles at Enercan, Mr. Desrosiers held several senior appointments at Finance Canada, Treasury Board, and the Privy Council. On that note, Ambassador Kawamura, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Jonathan. Please, Ambassador, we are all awaiting your remarks.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Heather. Good evening, everyone. First, Dr. Yamashita Yukari, Board Member Director, the Institute of Energy Economics, Japan. Mr. Frank Desrosiers, Assistant Deputy Minister for Natural Resources Canada. I would like to express my appreciation to the Macdonald-Laurier Institute for hosting this very important and timely webinar today. I also would like to thank all panelists, especially Dr. Yamashita, who is participating in this webinar from Japan. Today, nobody would deny that the Indo-Pacific region has become the growth and strategic center of the world. Statistics shows that the Indo-Pacific region is home to 60% of the world's population, producing 60% of global GDP, contributing 2/3 of current global growth. At the same time, the region is home of challenges to the rule-based order and maritime security that, without proactive engagement, will have the potential to derail regional and, in the end, global stability and prosperity as well. Against this background, Japan has been working together with partner countries to realize a free and open Indo-Pacific. Free and open Indo-Pacific is a vision to formulate a strategy to engage in the region based on supporting resilience, prosperity, and stability, grounded in the promotion of an inclusive rule-based order. Many countries and regions have already formulated their own strategies or visions. In his mandate letter to Foreign Minister Melanie Joly in December last year, Prime Minister Trudeau asked the Foreign Minister to develop and launch a comprehensive Indo-Pacific strategy for Canada. Japan and Canada have been working for the realization of a free and open Indo-Pacific since April 2019, when our prime ministers shared their views on strengthening the strategic partnership between Japan and Canada under the vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific. In May 2021, as Heather introduced, our foreign ministers announced the 6 operative areas of cooperation for that purpose. Energy security, as well as the environment and climate change, are 2 key areas of such cooperation between our 2 countries. On February 8th, in their first summit meeting, this time over the phone, Prime Minister Kishida and Prime Minister Trudeau also agreed to advance further in these 6 areas of cooperation, including cooperation in energy and climate change. The discussion about Japan-Canada energy security cooperation has become active, especially since the Great East Earthquake in Japan in March 2011. Various cooperation agreements were signed between Japan and Canada in the area of liquefied natural gas, LNG, both in the government and other areas. Then in 2018, joint venture partners, including a Japanese company, made a final investment decision in the LNG Canada project LNG Canada is expected to start its LNG exports to the Asian market in the late 2020s. The project will contribute to energy security in Asia, including Japan, if it is implemented as scheduled. The project will also further enhance the strategic partnership between Japan and Canada. As many of you see in media today, heightened tension in Ukraine has brought about the issue of the LNG supply to European nations. But as a matter of fact, today I joined with other G7 colleagues of ambassadors in Canada with the Ukraine Charge of Affairs ambassador to support their sovereignty and territorial integrity. But in particular, as a part of Japan's contribution to support the European nations who may suffer of the disruption and the shortage of LNG supply in this last part of the winter, Japan has decided to support those European friends by sending our LNG carrier ship to Europe. Actually, already our LNG carriers have arrived in Europe and supplied extra LNG energy resources to the European friends in need. So this is part of Japan's commitment to the G7 unity and our commitment to helping the friends in need. So this case shows the strategic importance of LNG in geopolitics. LNG has now been viewed by many stakeholders in the world of its value as the strategic material and the meaning of a strategic resources. Canada is our important partner for this stable LNG supply with various comparative advantages, including rich reserves, high production technology, and the shortest and safest sea lane for transport through the North Pacific. I'd like to underline the shortest and the safest route connecting between the two sides of the Pacific, Japan and Canada. Concerning environment and climate change cooperation towards our shared goal of achieving net zero emissions by 2050, Japan and Canada made new commitments at the Leaders' Summit on Climate in April 2021. More precisely, Canada committed for 40 to 45% reductions below 2005 levels by 2030 for its greenhouse gas emissions, GHG. On the other hand, Japan announced its aim to reduce its GHG emissions by 46% in fiscal year 2030 from its fiscal year 2013 levels. And furthermore, to continue major efforts in its challenge to meet the ambitious goal of cutting its emissions by 50%. At the COP26 in November 2021, Prime Minister Kishida further announced that Japan would lead the way in the clean energy transition, with a particular focus on Asia by leading various initiatives, including the development of major projects worth $100 million to transform fossil fuel-fired thermal power into zero-emission thermal power, such as ammonia and hydrogen. Japan and Canada are now discussing cooperation towards our shared goal of net zero by 2050. In order to achieve net zero, the world, including Japan and Canada, are paying a lot of attention to hydrogen energy. Japan was the first country to adopt the national hydrogen policy by issuing its basic hydrogen strategy in 2017. Japan also issued its green growth strategy in December 2021. With these strategies, Japan has been working to increase the amount of hydrogen and reduce its supply cost in the country, for example, by establishing an international supply chain for hydrogen energy. In parallel, in its hydrogen strategy issued in December 2020, Canada aims to become the third largest producer of hydrogen and have an established and competitive export market with Japan and other Asian countries as potential export destinations. Hydrogen energy surely has huge potential to be tapped on for Japan-Canada cooperation. Actually, such cooperation has already started. 2021 was the year in which Japan-Canada hydrogen cooperation took major steps forward. In October 2021, Japan Oil, Gas and Metals National Corporation, or JOGMEC, signed an agreement with the province of Alberta to promote further cooperation in carbon capture and storage and fuel hydrogen and fuel ammonia production, aiming to contribute to the supply of clean energy to Japan. When I visited province of Alberta last week, I had a chance to meet with and discuss with the Premier Jason Kenney on this particular project. Two Japanese companies also made certain progress in their projects, aiming to produce fuel ammonia and hydrogen with carbon capture and storage in Canada for the Asian market, including Japan. If these projects are to be implemented as scheduled, made in Canada hydrogen will be exported to Japan in the late 2020s. This will further enhance the Japan-Canada strategic partnership in the Indo-Pacific region. Today, or tonight, or this morning, energy experts and business representatives from Japan and Canada will discuss their energy and climate change policies, as well as Japan-Canada energy cooperation, including hydrogen energy. Japan-Canada cooperation in energy, environment, and climate change is a cooperation to contribute to energy security and decarbonization in Asia and the Indo-Pacific region. It will also strengthen Japan-Canada strategic partnership to proceed with a free and open Indo-Pacific. In a world in which geopolitics and geoeconomy evolves significantly as well as quickly, it is also necessary for like-minded countries, including Japan and Canada, to cooperate for energy security in the world. I hope today's discussion will give a lot of hints for Japan-Canada cooperation in energy securities, as well as environment and climate change in the Indo-Pacific region. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your wonderful remarks. Too bad I missed you when you were in Alberta last week, but glad you were able to make the visit out here. I noticed you mentioned a lot of these projects hinge on being implemented as scheduled, and I think that's an important message for Canadians to hear. The importance of these LNG and hydrogen and carbon capture projects happening as scheduled, and also that we do have the shortest and safest route from BC to provide these fuels to our partners in Asia. So thank you so much. Lots to chew on there, and I'm sure now we can hear the a complementary side of this story from our from the Assistant Deputy Minister Frank DeRosiers from Natural Resources Canada. Please go ahead, Frank.
Thank you, Eder, and good evening, everyone, or good morning. Minasan konbanwa. So thank you, Ambassador Kuwamura, for your insightful remarks. And before perhaps I address the subject at hand, I do feel, just like all of you, a duty to say a few words about the recent events that just took place today. As you know, the Government of Canada and Prime Minister Trudeau strongly condemned Russia's attack on Ukraine and its sovereignty today. Canada, along with G7 partners, have introduced new sanctions and are sending military support, along with our NATO operations in the region. And our thoughts are very much with the Ukrainians in Ukraine, but also around the world, including in Canada. There are many such families who are impacted. So those events, I guess, underscore yet again the importance of energy security. It's true in Europe, it's true in the Americas, it's true in Asia, and it is a topic that, again, requires careful attention. I much appreciate having the opportunity today to touch on the importance of the Indo-Pacific region for Canada, as well as how that relationship with Japan in particular is critical for our shared goals in terms of global energy transition. The Indo-Pacific, as the ambassador has relayed, is of strong interest to the country, as enunciated in our recent policy pronouncements, speech from the throne, mandate letters. And so for a number of reasons, it is an opportunity for us to diversify our markets beyond North America, but also an opportunity for us to strengthen relationship with a key region of this world. It is understanding that all countries want to respond to their energy needs in their respective borders and to meet their citizens and their firms' needs. But we also have a duty to do what's right for the planet and make sure that we work toward that low carbon future that we all espouse. But that broad statement is not so easy to accomplish. So many nations struggle to find reliable, affordable energy alternative to what's currently available. And therefore, many of them end up reverting to our emitting fuels, such as coal. You heard from the Japanese ambassador, the country's commitment to move toward the net zero goals for 2050. And Canada very much share that same ambition, as we again signaled in the recent months and years. And this is why having the collaboration between those two leading countries is such a natural fit and collaboration. And it led us to formalize, as you heard, this collaboration on energy to the Canada-Japan Energy Policy Dialogue with MITI, the Ministry of Technology and Industry in Japan. Maybe a few words you heard from the ambassadors of the leading projects that are currently going on, especially as they relate to clean hydrogen, ammonia, and carbon capture and utilization. It is one of those focus areas of that particular dialogue. And we very much see Canada as being ideally positioned to be a supplier of choice for such products. The example of that October 2021 commitment by Japan Oil, Gas and Metal National Corporation is effectively quite a strong signal about Japan's seriousness in the démarche to work with Canada and Alberta in this particular case, as it relates to CCUS, hydrogen and ammonia production. More recently in February, Mitsui announced an investment into BC-based Econa Energy to find ways to extract clean hydrogen from natural gas. Another, again, opportunity to look at low carbon hydrogen sources. Canada also came with its own hydrogen strategy back in 2020. And we clearly have laid out some bold targets and ambitions that we very much intend to follow through on, to be a world-leading producer, user, and exporter of clean energy, as well as associate technologies. It is an area that Canada has been active on for many years, decades actually, and we want to make sure that we keep that technological lead over and above the abundant of our resource and proximity to markets. So perhaps on that score, allow me to pause, and I very much look forward to hear what our panelists and participants have to say. Back to you, Heather.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate your remarks. And certainly this seems to be an area that touches on a confluence of things that Canadians value, of growing the economy, protecting the environment, and also working collaboratively with our partners in Asia. So thank you very much for your remarks. Our next keynote speech here is going to come from Yamashita Yukari. She is a board member and director of the Institute of Energy Economics in Japan, and has led miscellaneous international and regional programs in the area of energy cooperation to the International Energy Agency, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, Economic Research Institute for Asia and East Asia, the International Partnership for Energy Efficiency Cooperation, and has served as the president of the International Association for Energy Economics, where she is currently the executive vice president. We could go on and on. She is an estimable speaker on energy economics, and we are delighted to have her here. So thank you, Yukari, for speaking with us today, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Heather. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Today I talk about the hydrogen and ammonia looking from this corner, the Asian side of the Pacific Ocean. Please the slide to be shown. Okay. It seems, next slide, please. Yeah, it seems that there is lack of balance in international rulemaking. It is unclear where we are heading. For example, the investment finance for fossil fuels, or EU taxonomy, border adjustment by the European natural gas regulation, or carbon pricing. Well, a basic rule for Japan's energy policy is based on 3E+S, the environment, economic efficiency, and energy security and safety. But if we evaluate each energy efficiency, renewables, nuclear, or decarbonized fossil fuels, they are not necessarily perfect on its own. New technologies such as hydrogen, ammonia, the carbon recycle, or direct air capture receive high expectation but have high uncertainty yet. Unfortunately, Japan is not connected to others in the region, such as a power line or pipeline. Moreover, international energy situation, as the previous speakers mentioned, is so fragile and unstable. So therefore, we need a portfolio approach, and we should get involved in international rulemaking. Next, please. In October 2020, Japan announced the carbon neutrality target to be achieved by 2050. The first step, second step, third step are there. The first radical energy efficiency improvement is assumed. Then the electrification of as many demand as possible, and then thirdly, to supply power from nuclear or the renewables. But Japan, however, has limited domestic renewable energy resources, and nuclear is rather slow to reoperate. The carbon neutrality cannot be achieved only by addressing the power sector. We need to decarbonize all energy demand sectors, such as industry or transportation. Thus, we are looking into hydrogen and ammonia, which can be used not only for power generation, but also for industrial heat or for transport fuel. Next, please. Then let me talk a little about the non-power sector. We tend to believe that carbon neutrality can be achieved simply by shifting energy use to electricity and then by decarbonizing power generation. Even in Japan's discussion on basic energy plan, most of the debate focused on so-called energy mix, which is how to decarbonize power generation in the more electrified future. But it is only half the challenge. Let me explain with charts. The left chart shows primary energy demand of our two scenarios, reference and advanced technologies scenario, where we did not include hydrogen potential, and then that for the 2050. Although we see more purple, which is nuclear, and green, which is renewables, remaining 60% are still fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and gas. Which sector will still use such a lot of fossil fuels? Look on the right. This shows which sector emits how much CO2 in our analysis. You can see that lower part of the bar showed in light blue will remain more or less the same level as now, while upper part of the bar colored in yellow shows huge reduction by 2050. Yes, blue part is non-power sector, which may have more challenges to be decarbonized. Next, please. Now, the trend of non-fossil energy use in the power generation sector is shown on the left. With solar and wind at the top in green, we expect very rapid and steady decarbonization in the power sector. On the other hand, non-power generation sector on the right, we see a very slow development in terms of decarbonization. The orange part of the bar is solid biomass, which represents traditional biomass used in rural areas, such as wood, that they are expected to decrease over time, replaced by modern, more efficient fossil fuel energy. So the second and big challenge is how to decarbonize non-power generation sector, mainly industry and transport. Next, please. Hydrogen and ammonia are attracting attentions from around the world. As they do not emit CO2 when we use them, they are considered to be important option for energy transition. They can be used in many sectors, not limited to power generation sector, and they can be produced both from renewable power and hydrocarbon fuels. Green hydrogen is made from renewable power using electrolysis, while blue hydrogen is more from fossil fuels, especially gas with CCS. The left chart shows different kind of demands can be supplied by both blue and green hydrogen or ammonia, while right chart shows supply and demand of synthetic methane or fuel which can be made from hydrogen and then used for heat and transport. The advantage of this is that we can utilize existing infrastructure such as gas pipelines or gasoline stations. Ammonia can be made from hydrogen. It is considered as a least cost carrier available at the moment to transport hydrogen. In fact, Saudi Arabia exported fuel ammonia to Japan in 2020. The ammonia is also known for its additional merit to reduce CO2 if we co-fire it with coal, as Ambassador Kawamura pointed out. In fast-growing Asia, there are many newly built coal thermal power plants. It is more costly to demolish them. Then why don't we utilize these new fleets by co-firing with ammonia, reducing CO2 emission down to LNG equivalent level, and then shift to 100% ammonia or hydrogen over time? I say that is good start for transition. Next, please. Please look on the right. By using hydrogen and ammonia, we can reduce CO2 not only in power generation but also in non-power generation sector. And that does not change the primary energy demand too much, and there will be a shift away from coal and oil on to natural gas as a feedstock for hydrogen making. It is shown on the left as a primary energy demand not changing much. Next, please. Here are some data on Japan's hydrogen or ammonia roadmap. Hydrogen is a critical piece for Japan to achieve carbon neutrality. No hydrogen, no carbon neutrality for Japan. Hydrogen will play a key role to supply zero emissions electricity supply and decarbonize non-power sectors. Next, please. Well, when we say clean hydrogen, there are two types, blue and green. What we believe as a near-term technology is blue hydrogen. Hydrogen made from fossil fuels combined with CCS or CCUS at the production point. Green hydrogen is to make hydrogen from renewable electricity using electrolysis. This still needs technology development to bring cost reduction. Gray hydrogen is to use fossil fuels without CCS attached. Important point is that consuming countries do not care much about whether it is blue or green, as long as imported hydrogen is so-called clean hydrogen. Next, please. It's a little bit busy slide, but this is to explain a little bit about the demonstration ongoing in Japan. Among hydrogen supply options, supply chain development of ammonia has become accelerated in recent years. Various fuel ammonia projects are being explored and developed. Currently, 20% co-firing for coal thermal power generation is being tested by JERA. The test is to be finished in 2024. Other power companies will follow after the JERA's test. Japanese government set the volume target of ammonia at 3 million tons as of 2030, approximately 1% of the total power generation supply. A cost reduction is needed. Ammonia is the lowest cost hydrogen carrier, but it is not the cheap energy compared to other fossil fuels, such as natural gas and coal. Government is considering policy support, but the industry also needs to reduce the supply cost. Fuel ammonia is one of practical solutions to realize carbon neutral maritime transportation. According to some estimates by the industry, 40% will be ammonia by 2050. Next, please. This chart shows how many suppliers around the world are expected to join the force. Both green and blue hydrogens are important. General idea is that blue hydrogen will help to develop infrastructure until green hydrogen becomes cost competitive. Next, please. This slide shows the comparison among different types of ammonia. Well, among various supply sources, blue ammonia produced in Middle East is estimated as the most cost competitive for Japan. That is the top third from the top under the blue ammonia. Regarding green ammonia, wind energy-based ammonia from Chile is estimated as the most competitive, which is the very bottom of the chart. Next slide, please. There are different standards for clean or low carbon hydrogen. Both green and blue hydrogens are important, but these standards must be addressed. And then these standards do not reject blue hydrogen, but these standards are so strict that the GHG footprint must be considered, and then because it is rather important for the industry. Next slide, please. So this is another result from our latest outlook. On the left is CO2 emission path for our two basic scenarios. One in blue is a reference scenario where current policies and technologies are assumed into the future. Another in red is advanced technology scenario, which assumes maximum introduction of robust policies and foreseeable and advanced technologies with public acceptance to tackle climate change challenge. But I have to remind you that because we have another scenario, this scenario doesn't include hydrogen and ammonia. Light orange band below refers to those carbon neutrality commitments announced by over 120 countries in the region. If they are to achieve the commitment in full, it goes down farther. But these declared carbon neutrality commitments are just around 50% reduction of the current level, which is equivalent to T-degree scenario. So these still far from meeting the net zero target. This is because majority of the carbon neutrality declaration came from advanced countries plus China, Russia, and or Saudi Arabia. Looking on the right, the rest of the world, especially developing and newly industrialized countries, are yet to join the group. And far right, the chart shows why. Those countries which foresee emission increase and those which have not declared carbon neutrality target are yet to enjoy economic development. They have lower energy consumption per capita, which means they are still expected to grow and they need room for more energy use. This is one of the reasons why our estimates show that we may not reach carbon neutrality yet by 2050 if we do not accelerate the technology development and the introduction of hydrogen and ammonia. Next, please. In conclusion, decarbonization push, which initiated by EU or financial sector combined with economic recovery, are promoting shift towards the use of cleaner energy and energy transition, not limited to renewables and nuclear. We believe a portfolio approach would be more ideal, combining a variety of energies. Looking at the current situation, the concern for the energy security tells me why. Because of the limited potential for renewable energy, usage of decarbonized fossil fuels together in additional to clean energy is essential in Indo-Pacific region. Carbon-free hydrogen is expected to be an enabler. With rapid market expansion and cost reductions, hydrogen brings a new option to energy importing Asian countries and even to energy producing countries. For that, CCS and CCUS will be a key. For rapidly developing Asia, dependence on fossil fuel use, especially more economical coal, continues even in China, which has declared carbon neutrality by 2060. Energy security will remain an important issue for Asia. Even cleaner natural gas or yet to be utilized carbon-free hydrogen will remain imported energy. So high expectation is here to Canada as an ideal partner. Collaboration is necessary for technology innovation, cost reduction, rule making, and competitive market creation. Canada and Japan are well positioned for such collaboration for the security of Indo-Pacific region. Thank you very much for your attention. This ends my presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your expertise. I'm reminded of the old adage that amateurs talk strategy and professionals talk logistics. And obviously, you have thought through the many logistics that will accompany this energy transition. I think in Canada, because we are so energy rich, because we have such affordable energy, because we are a producer, many people have taken for granted, all the dynamics that go along with energy and the implications of energy security. And so this was very illuminating, important for us to hear that there's an expectation and a need for Canada to continue to be an energy producing partner in the world. Our next to discuss and so to reflect on your remarks and to contribute some of their own are not some of the Canadians that take energy for granted. They are two fellows that certainly consider energy all the time, every day, as part of their professional lives. And so briefly to respond to Yamashita's remarks and to provide a bit more of their own context before we go into the panel discussion, I'd like to introduce Jeff Kucharski. He's a strategic thinker, policy entrepreneur, and academic, an adjunct professor at Royal Roads University in Victoria, and a senior fellow at Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Before retiring from the public service 10 years ago, he was ADM at the Alberta Department of Energy, but is perfect for this panel because he spent almost half of his working career in Japan in various roles, including working in the Government of Alberta's Trade Office and as Consul and Senior Trade Commissioner in Japan as well. So very knowledgeable on energy and Japanese Canadian issues. Wonderful to have you here, Jeff. Jeff, can you find the mute button?
Sorry. Thank you, Heather. And Your Excellency, Ambassador Kawamura, and distinguished guests, it's a great pleasure to be here on the virtual stage with such distinguished Japanese and Canadian presenters. Nihon ni iru katagata, ohayo gozaimasu. Yamashita Sensei, I'd like to congratulate you on an excellent presentation, very interesting. I appreciated the extensive data you showed us and also your caution about the tendency to focus only on the power sector. This seems to be the case very much in the media and among many commentators these days, but it's good to look at the non-power sector. I appreciate also the primary energy demand scenarios you showed us for 2050, and that is even in 2050, the world will still be quite reliant on fossil fuels, especially in the non-power sector. So we need to be realistic about how to address the needs of this sector, and hydrogen can be a key solution here. Okay, I'll start my presentation. Oh, I think one more thing I'd like to say, Yamashita-san, is that I couldn't agree more on the portfolio approach to the energy mix. And I'll speak to that myself in my presentation as well. I do agree that Canada and Japan are well suited to collaborate on hydrogen and ammonia development and trade. And so that was a really good point. Thank you again. Okay, I'll begin my presentation now. And you can go to the next slide. Okay, I'm going to start with the big picture, looking at global demand first. So looking at total primary energy supply and comparing the energy mix in 2020 with the one anticipated under the IEA's announced policy scenario in 2050, we can see some profound changes. The share of fossil fuels in the global energy mix declines from about 80% today to about 50% by 2050. Even though the share of fossil fuels remains significant in 2050, much of this is expected to be with abatement technologies like CCUS. Obviously, the continued reliance on fossil fuels raises significant geopolitical concerns about energy going forward, which I've talked about in other fora, and I will discuss in a couple of minutes in this presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, here, just a graph showing the Indo-Pacific energy supply projection. So in 2050, demand for energy will be about 46%, so 46%, I should say, of global demand or energy supply in this case will be in the Indo-Pacific. So this is for, at least for energy, the most important region of the world going forward. Next slide, please. And then looking at things longer term and on a regional basis, the outlook for energy demand by region shows that the Indo-Pacific region will be the strongest region of demand in the period leading up to 2050 and account for about 52% of primary energy demand. Previous slide, I actually was talking about supply. Here we're talking about demand, but still it's right around that 50% mark. So that's very significant. Given its growing regional importance in global energy markets, we can assume that demand for hydrogen and other energy resources in the region will continue to be strong in the coming decades. Next slide, please. So what about global hydrogen production today? So according to the IEA, there's close to 90 million tons of hydrogen produced worldwide in 2020, mainly for use in the chemical and refining sectors. Most was produced from natural gas or coal, particularly in China for using coal. Low carbon hydrogen comprises less than 1% of current total hydrogen production. Most hydrogen is produced near where it is used, and there's little hydrogen pipeline and storage infrastructure in place today. More than 20 countries have developed hydrogen strategies, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Next slide, please. Looking at global demand for hydrogen and ammonia, you can see in the graph that the demand for hydrogen fuels varies depending on the climate policy scenario used. So looking at supply, you can see here that there's three scenarios at the bottom on the left-hand graph. The one I typically tend to rely on mostly is the announced policy scenario. So that's the middle one. But if the world does follow a more stringent climate change policy pathway, then we can expect that there'll be much more supply of electricity and gas with CCUS. On the demand side, you can see here that we've got also the three scenarios. In the IEA's announced policy scenario and in the net zero scenarios, demand picks up more rapidly as low carbon hydrogen and hydrogen-based fuels are used to provide flexibility in the power sector. Hydrogen currently used in industry is replaced gradually by low carbon hydrogen, and new end uses emerge, including in transport and for heating in buildings and so on. Obviously, attention is increasingly being paid to the policies needed to stimulate demand for low carbon hydrogen and hydrogen-based liquids, including ammonia, methanol, and other synthetic liquid hydrocarbons that have very low emissions intensity. Next slide, please. So there's various estimates for hydrogen demand up to 2050. All of them highly depend, as I said before, on how rigorously global climate change policies are implemented, and also the level of policy support to create market certainty and reduce the cost of hydrogen and production. So in this chart, which is based on the IEA's announced policy scenario, total low carbon hydrogen production increases to 20 exajoules or 180 million tons in 2050 from 11 exajoules today, so almost double. In some countries such as China, the EU, Japan, and Korea, domestic demand for hydrogen is greater than domestic production, so they become net importers of hydrogen. And in other countries such as the US, the Middle East, Australia, and Canada, production exceeds domestic demand, and so they become net exporters. Now, my comment on the IEA's numbers here is that I think actually in the case of Canada, this projection may be underestimating the level of production of hydrogen, given that significant investments are already being made in ammonia and hydrogen production in Canada for export. So this may be underestimating that a bit. So we'll see. Next slide, please. There's other higher estimates for future demand for hydrogen that are based on more optimistic scenarios for climate change policies. For example, Morgan Stanley, the investment bank, estimates that if governments take their climate commitment seriously, today's market could increase more than 5 times to over 500 million tons rather than 180 million tons by 2050 as new applications for hydrogen grow. So you can see some of those applications in this chart. As you can see, new uses for hydrogen in transport and power generation, for example, are now just emerging and could become more significant by 2050. The IEA estimates that around 80% of low carbon hydrogen produced in 2050 will be green hydrogen using electrolysis, assuming significant policy support for electrolytic hydrogen in various regions. Next slide, please. So now we'll shift to talking about hydrogen strategies. And Yamashita-sensei mentioned this already, as did Kawamura-san. And so we have more than 20 countries now developed or developing hydrogen strategies. And the demand for hydrogen and hydrogen carrier fuels, such as ammonia, are growing. Canada has developed, as Mr. DeRosier said, its hydrogen strategy for Canada, and provinces such as British Columbia, Alberta, and Quebec also have developed hydrogen strategies or action plans. The goal of all these strategies is to help Canada create a low carbon economy, obviously, and meet the goal of supplying up to 30% of Canada's energy demand by 2050. Next slide. So let's talk about Japan. Hydrogen, and this has been covered to some extent already, but hydrogen's been a part of long-term energy planning in Japan since about 2010, when Japan issued its 3rd strategic energy plan. The 4th strategic energy plan in 2014 was more detailed, stating that a roadmap for hydrogen society would be formulated. That roadmap has been amended and expanded several times since, and the latest version, as far as I'm aware, is of March 2019. Also mentioned was Japan's green growth strategy toward 2050 carbon neutrality. It sets 14 priority fields in that strategy, and ammonia fuel and hydrogen are one of the priority fields that are highlighted. And in February 2021, the Japanese Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, or METI, began promoting an updated roadmap for fuel ammonia. And that roadmap focuses on the use of ammonia in thermal power plants and as a shipping fuel to put Japan at the forefront of fuel ammonia use. Japan is at the forefront of developing hydrogen infrastructure, I think, and has ambitious plans to develop a market for hydrogen in Asia. Japan has already made several investments in foreign countries to manufacture ammonia, which is, of course, a hydrogen carrier for export. In future, it's possible that interregional hydrogen market will develop or hubs for hydrogen trade. Japan is probably hoping that there will be one in Japan, and I think that's likely to develop. Next slide, please. Now turning to energy security and geopolitics. Global energy supply is increasingly shaped by climate change policy and geopolitics. One thing the current crisis in Ukraine demonstrates is the danger of becoming too reliant on energy supplies from a single supplier country, especially one that's also an authoritarian regime that does not share our commitment to the global rules-based order. As the energy transition unfolds and alternative forms of energy become more widely available, they will potentially have geopolitical implications as well. Energy resources are relatively scarce. They are unevenly distributed across different countries and regions. and this applies to hydrogen production as well. Hydrogen is likely to be attractive to countries where renewable power generation cannot fully replace coal and natural gas. For example, Japan and Korea, as Yamashita Sensei suggested, face hurdles that limit wind, hydro, and geothermal power use. And they also lack suitable geological locations for carbon dioxide sequestration. On the other hand, China has exploitable wind and solar resources and is pursuing a full self-sufficiency model in energy. Therefore, energy resources have geopolitical and security dimensions. Hydrogen is no different. The availability of relatively cheap natural gas with CCS, cheap electricity for electrolysis, adequate infrastructure, and proximity to markets will all combine to determine which countries will be competitive in the race to produce and supply hydrogen fuels. China is likely to have a large influence on shaping the hydrogen market, with demand for hydrogen expected to nearly double there by 2030. China's state-owned energy enterprises are likely to use their considerable financial power to enter the hydrogen business. Japan's ambitious moves to develop overseas production and import ammonia and hydrogen are hints that a competitive race has begun to dominate the hydrogen business. Hydrogen and ammonia trade may eventually come to have geopolitical implications similar to those of existing energy resources as nations increasingly compete for access to them. Next slide. So in conclusion, it's now apparent, given the energy crisis we've been experiencing since the post-pandemic recovery started, that the energy transition cannot be dominated by any one energy solution. Renewables by themselves are not an all-encompassing silver bullet. Instead, we need to reaffirm that all of the above, or a portfolio approach, as Yamashita Sensei suggested, that includes renewables, energy storage, hydrogen, synthetic fuels, hydrocarbons, and other energy sources will be needed to navigate smoothly through what will be a multi-decade transition. Demand for energy resources in the Indo-Pacific will grow in line with economic growth in that region, even with robust climate change initiatives. Over the next several decades, at least, the Indo-Pacific will be the fastest growing region in the world where the demand for energy resources will be strongest. Canada should position itself to meet these needs while building strong relationships with countries that share our goals and values. Canada is building capacity to become a stable, reliable supplier of a wide range of energy resources, including oil, LNG, hydrogen, ammonia, critical minerals, and alternative fuels. With Canada having the closest energy export terminal capacity to Japan, and with safe and secure North Pacific sea lanes, there is significant potential for Canadian energy resources to reduce energy security risks in Japan, in Korea, in Taiwan, and in other ally and partner countries in the region. Canada can provide much needed energy security as the world navigates a very uncertain and tumultuous period, while at the same time moving through an energy transition that's expected to last, as I said, several decades. Next slide, please. I just want to take this moment to promote a commentary I wrote on the topic of energy security in the Indo-Pacific that was published today on the Macdonald-Laurier Institute website, which goes into more detail on some of the issues we talked about here today. So you can go to that website if you'd like to read it. Next slide. I'd just like to thank everyone for your attention. Arigatou gozaimashita.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and congratulations on publishing that paper. I look forward to reading it myself. Looking through your slides, and thank you especially for the conclusions. Those are things that I think more Canadians need to hear and understand, including in governments. But when you showed the IEA chart of hydrogen demand and Canadian production, that certainly gives some of us pause, and it certainly doesn't seem to match up, with what we'd heard of the need for hydrogen and the need for more global supply, and the role that Canada needs to play if we are to meet that. And so I'm sure Matthew Klippenstein, our next speaker, has some comments on what the gap is between, what the IEA expects Canada to produce in terms of hydrogen and what we might be able to produce if everything, lined up and we did things accordingly. So it's my pleasure to introduce Matthew, the regional manager of the Canadian Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association, a chemical engineer who has worked in BC's clean energy economy for the past 20 years, and I co-authored the BC Hydrogen Study, as well as the industry reference Fuel Cell Industry Review. And so it's my pleasure, Matthew, to have you provide a few remarks on this subject.
All right. Thank you very much, Heather, for that very generous introduction. I'd also like to thank Ambassador Kawamura, Your Excellency, for your historical context that you provided, to Frank Desrosiers, again, for his remarks, for a very information-dense summary from Yamashita-san, and also to our prior speaker, Dr. Kucharski, for his further context around the energy considerations, not just around efficiency, but around security, around resilience. So I'll spend a few minutes here talking a little bit about the Canadian Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association, and then provide some context for how the Canadian industry can help the Indo-Pacific region with its growing energy needs. Next slide, please. I suppose everyone's had this chart now, so it's my turn. What I've done here is I've summarized the role that hydrogen will have in a net zero year 2050. In broad terms, direct electrification does provide most of the work, most of the decarbonization. That's the big part of the lobster claw. And then hydrogen represents a more modest but absolutely vital portion of our efforts to decarbonize. Ideally, our efforts to decarbonize, which help spawn new industries, new jobs, and additional prosperity. Worldwide, the estimate is up to about 24% of final energy use in 2050 will be directly through hydrogen. Next slide. A couple words about the Canadian Hydrogen Fuel Cell Association. We are an umbrella trade association covering the entirety of Canada for the hydrogen sector, as well as the fuel cell sector, the hydrogen fuel cell sector. We have provincial branches in British Columbia, Ontario, Quebec. We are affiliated with a group in the Maritime provinces, and we are building up our organization in Alberta as well. The idea is Canada is very vast geographically, a little bit the inverse of Japan, not as many people in a very large space. And so we want to have specialization in each region so that hydrogen in its various roles can flourish as much as possible. Next slide, please. The CHFCA is also a technology agnostic on hydrogen. There is a tendency to talk about the colors of hydrogen. I don't know anyone who really does prefer this as opposed to measuring on emissions. Our approach is that we are very encouraging and supportive of efforts to generate low emissions hydrogen in its various uses. Whether that comes from above ground resources, perhaps wind, solar, hydroelectric electrolysis, or from below ground resources, whether that's natural gas, coal, or perhaps even oil. So technology neutral. Next slide. So Canada is one of the countries which has a hydrogen strategy. Ours was published this past year. I believe there's about 26 countries now with hydrogen strategies published. There are also hydrogen strategies or similar documents in a number of provinces or regions of Canada. By the end of the year, there will be 5 regions of Canada, each with their own hydrogen strategy. And as a result, we don't just have a national approach, but we can leverage the interest that the provinces have, each provincial government, I guess prefectures would be the equivalent in Japan, for helping its own industry flourish. We do have hydrogen hubs in development, ideally drawing from industrial energy usage, industrial energy flows, where we can spin out the use of hydrogen and also leverage, in these cases, export opportunities as well. There are several other funding opportunities and in investigations for decarbonizing our gas energy needs. Now, hydrogen and fuel cells have a very long history in Canada. The renaissance of the hydrogen fuel cell sector happened in British Columbia in the early 1980s with Geoffrey Ballard. And so the next slide shows the number of countries where Canada's fuel cell cluster has shipped hydrogen fuel cell stacks. This does not include electrolyzers, which are actually an even larger map. The summary from this slide is that Canada's hydrogen fuel cell sector, fuel cells being one subset of all the uses for hydrogen, the Canadian sector's products have been shipped to 42 countries worldwide, representing 65% of the world's population. So again, even though Canada is quite distant from Japan, not quite as much of a population, certainly, as the Indo-Pacific region, we do have the ability to provide our solutions worldwide. Final slide, please. With respect to hydrogen exports, the recent tragedies ongoing point to the importance of having a geographic diversity in securing one's energy supplies. And being situated in the Western Hemisphere, Canada has an opportunity not just with Europe, supplying Europe from the East Coast, but also on the West Coast as well. So we are hopeful and determined to make sure that we can scale up our hydrogen production, currently about 3 million tons per year, to more than 20 million tons per year by 2050, ideally still further beyond that. What this would allow is for Canada to help Indo-Pacific region countries in terms of their energy needs. I believe Yamashita-san had mentioned, I believe it's on the order of 95% of Japan's primary energy use is imported. The figure for Korea is about 80%, and India is creeping up as it industrializes. So energy imports represent about 45% currently of their overall energy use. This is a situation that Canada can take advantage of, and our ability to access low-cost resources, transform them, most likely into ammonia for the time being, and provide them to end use cases would be very helpful mutually. A recent paper, which I didn't have time to include, provided a techno-economic analysis of the shipment of hydrogen from hydrocarbons hydrogen from natural gas with carbon management to Japan through the form of ammonia, estimating that the cost for the end-use hydrogen dissociated from the ammonia would be on the order of $5 Canadian per kilogram. I'd be pleased to provide that paper for any readers or viewers, rather, who would be interested. With that, that's the end of my presentation. I'll turn it back over to Heather.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much. This has been a very knowledge dense. We're talking about energy density, and this has been a very knowledge dense webinar. Now we have the opportunity to have a few questions from the audience members, so feel free to plug those in. And our panelists, Matthew, Jeff, and Yamashita, will be happy to answer them. I have a few of my own also. But before we go to the questions in the Q&A, Yamashita, I just wanted to give you a chance to just briefly respond to any of the things you've heard from Matthew or Jeff.
Thank you. Since both the commentators' family names are rather difficult to pronounce, I go Canadian way, and let me call you on the first name basis. So Jeff, thank you very much. Your presentation echoed my presentation, especially on the concern about the geopolitical issue, which is actually creeping up, not only in the Europe, but also worldwide, because the situation in Europe is influencing on the international energy market. When you talk about the market creation, that is exactly for the hydrogen. That is exactly what we would like to emphasize. The more countries on board, more companies on board, we can create a huge hydrogen market, maybe as well as ammonia. Then we can expect the cost to come down. So we welcome competition. We welcome many countries to be on board. But of course, I must emphasize that Canada has the advantage of having a rich endorsement of natural resources, including actually critical minerals. The critical mineral issue is a big concern as well, but today we talk about the hydrogen and ammonia. As for the Matthew, you mentioned many numbers, and then also you emphasized that you have a green. The Canada has both green and blue, and then the low emission is what matters, and that is exactly what we said. The clean hydrogen is what matters for the
Yes.
importing countries. And of course, our expectation is on Canada because you were considered as our ally, and then the safe and reliable source of the supply for us, not only limited to the natural gas or oil, but also for the hydrogen and ammonia. I forgot to mention our government's target price for the ammonia or the hydrogen, and hydrogen actually. We hope that we will reach as low as $2 per kilogram of hydrogen anytime. It used to be the 2050 target, but we
Yes.
hope that we can actually accelerate our effort to reach that target sooner than 2050. Thank you
Right.
very much both for your excellent presentation, which emphasize the points I wanted to make.
Sure. Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much. So I have a few questions of myself, and not all of us like you are hydrogen experts. So even on the technical side, before we get into the politics, what is the cost? Is that the main barrier to uptake to hydrogen ammonia? Is it the cost? And can you tell us a little bit more about the difference in cost between blue hydrogen and green hydrogen, and if that's a barrier, or if that plays into the choices that we make at all? I don't know who wants to start. You might all have an opinion on that.
Um,
Yamashita, you're muted, but why don't you start, and then we'll go to Matthew and then Jeff.
Okay. Let me give you very basic the comparison. We believe that the green hydrogen is more expensive than blue hydrogen because there is much to do with the technology development. I don't give you the number because I believe Matthew has the number. But then it is also expected that it is a very important mean of this, how to say, storing the electricity from the renewables. So that's why the Europeans are pushing. So we expect the cost to come down as the market will be developed within the Europe. But in the meantime, we can push the blue hydrogen because there's abundance of the fossil fuels, and then they are afraid of making their the fossil fuels as the stranded asset. So we utilize that the abundant fossil fuels into the blue hydrogen, which we believe is less costly than the green hydrogen. So with that, we create the market, so the demand will be there, and that will further push down the price or cost. So over to you, Matthew.
Sure. Yes. Thank you. Building on what Yamashita-san had mentioned about the differences between, say, energy importers versus energy exporters, in areas which import energy, which import natural gas, blue hydrogen generated from natural gas with carbon management is going to be is cheaper at the moment than green hydrogen, but it will be easier, less difficult for green hydrogen to become cheaper because the importers of natural gas are already paying great costs for the import of natural gas. In North America, in Alberta specifically, Western Canada, we have possibly the world's lowest prices for natural gas because it is sort of stranded mid-continent. As a result, the modeling that we've seen says that this is the last part of the world in which green hydrogen would be, hydrogen from electrolysis, from renewables, would become cheaper than blue hydrogen, hydrogen from natural gas with carbon management. In the very long term, we would expect that green hydrogen might become ultimately cheaper, even in regions such as Alberta, much as Yamashita-san is saying, but there will be a very large overlap, at least in areas which are rich in natural gas, with the right geology for carbon capture, for blue hydrogen to play a very pivotal role.
Thank you so much. And Jeff, just building on that, because we've done some work on energy security together. And in Canada, there are in many corners concerns with carbon capture, with talking about decarbonized fossil fuels, with talking about LNG as a bridge fuel. What are your responses to that? Do you think it's logical that we need to start, thinking, kind of pragmatically about blue hydrogen and blue ammonia? And what do you think needs to happen in the political context for that to be more acceptable?
Yeah, well, first of all, I completely agree with the two speakers before me that we're very likely to, be relying on blue hydrogen for some time to come while we work on reducing the cost of green hydrogen. And I agree that there is a huge advantage to some extent in the availability of cheap hydro in British Columbia, for example, and possibly in Quebec, which could be used through the process of electrolysis to produce hydrogen. But in the short medium term, yes, it's blue hydrogen. How do we sort of expand or roll out more use of hydrogen? I think in Canada, I mean, this is going to depend a lot on how much policy support we get from governments, how we can drive the cost down, building infrastructure, whether it's pipelines or other infrastructure to allow for, let's say, fueling stations for transport vehicles, these kinds of things. So, that might be something Frank might want to comment on, what the longer term thinking is in government regarding those kinds of things. And I think Canada's still very much in a period now where we're developing these kinds of frameworks and ideas. So that's about all I could say at the moment.
Thanks, Jeff. I did want to go back, the big premise for this webinar is thinking about Canadian and Japanese cooperation on energy security. And so I did want to touch on that a bit more and to think about, what are the steps that needs to be taken? Why is it important that countries negotiate and come to agreements and take practical steps at that political level in order to make sure that it can actually happen at that practical, commercial level? And Matthew, maybe I'll start with you before going to Yamashita and then finishing off with Jeff again.
Sure. Okay. So there's great value in having the political framework, bilateral trade agreements, multilateral trade agreements, to make it easier for companies to do business together. There's also a role for trade associations who may have memorandums of understanding between countries so that we can connect buyers to sellers, customers to producers. And so having that close relationship, long-standing relationship, and the ability to find solutions for people wanting these solutions is very helpful and speeds the process. One loses less time, searching for the right match.
Thank you. Yamashita.
Well, actually, Matthew covered almost everything. But what is important is we consuming countries are distant away from producing countries. And then what matters is actually transport cost. And we need to really bring that cost down so that it will become economical. And for that, we need, for initial stage, we need the government support to make it as a demonstration project or something so that we can confirm that it is possible, even though it is expensive. And then we expect the private sectors to go their own the industry and then try to find out how to bring down the cost. And then it will become commercial-based competition. But it takes long. At the moment, we have 3 demonstration projects with 3 different parts of the world, and we expect that Canada will join the force, and then we do some kind of demonstration project with Canada very soon, even though there are already the projects going on the CCS side. We hope that the bringing from all over the world will make a market. Therefore, it is very important to start with the demonstration project.
Thanks. And Jeff, I'll finish for you because it was literally your job, to negotiate and to foster some of these partnerships. Things like the ambassador coming to Alberta last week, to talk about hydrogen and CCS, the Japanese support for LNG Canada. What do you think is that critical role between Canada and Japan? What do they need to do together to help accomplish some of these things?
Yeah, well, I think they're well set, already to do this, and certainly Frank is very familiar, he's an integral part of it. But that's the discussions ongoing between Canada and Japan and other countries, energy cooperation agreements, whereby Canada, has an action plan and various projects and things that they work on with Japan, whether it's R&D or pilot projects or investment promotion or what have you. So those things are ongoing, and certainly will make a difference. I think cooperating with countries like Japan and others on border measures. So there's the possibility that standards may be set for low carbon fuels in certain markets. I'm thinking here of the EU. In the future, that may have an impact on how fast this industry can develop going forward. So, that's what I can add beyond what's already been said by Matthew and Yamashita Sensei. But I think there's plenty of opportunity for international collaboration, and I think that's already started. So that's encouraging.
Great. Well, we have just a few more minutes here, but one of the reasons why we have an audience and why we're putting on this webinar is because, energy security is very much in the news, and the energy crisis in Europe and Asia was very much in the news, and very much has become a political and an international issue. And so I'm wondering from all three of you, are there lessons we can learn from the 2021, 2022 energy crisis so that we can avoid it in 2022, 2023? Or are we doomed to repeat these kinds of energy crises several times as we go through this, what can be a very disruptive energy transition from a fossil fuel-based energy system to a low carbon fossil fuel? So kind of a general broad philosophical question, baby, but Yamashita, I'll start with you. Can we avoid another energy crisis going forward?
Well, these situations occurred with the, first of all, the 2021 was full of these incidents, starting with the Asia, and then in the, I forgot the name, the Texas, and then it continued on for the China, where they actually they put a very harsh policy on the no more coal development, and then that pushed up the demand for natural gas, and then pushed the spot prices in Asia. And then in September, very unfortunate shortage of wind power in Britain pushed up the natural gas prices. So these coincidentally happened here and there with the low power generation from the variable renewable power generation. But it was expected that these things could happen. Variable renewables cannot be very much reliable when the weather is not very, friendly for us. So to have the backup is very important. And then it goes back to my point of portfolio approach is important.
Thank you. Matthew, I'll let you comment on that before finishing this conversation off with Jeff.
Sure, yes. Building perhaps on the portfolio approach, on that philosophy, I think one big lesson from the crises we've had in the past couple of years, not just in the energy space, but is the need on resilience, which a portfolio approach allows. If something doesn't work, then you can fill in with other options. That's one reason why I think it's very important, and we'll work very hard to make sure that Canada is one of the participants in these pilot projects. And as a result, again, perhaps there's been a tendency to emphasize efficiency, or the low cost most of all, a recognition that resilience is equally important, arguably more important, I think, is one lesson that we will take out of this past couple years. And that will be very good in terms of ensuring that we develop hydrogen supply in various corners of the world, so that even in the case of disruption, there will still be supply for customers needing it.
Great. Matthew, before I turn over to Jeff to close us off, there was one audience question about fuel cells. So that's right for you.
Mm.
Is there some
Okay.
is there some potential for fuel cells to replace kind of the more traditional lithium kind of batteries? Is that what you're foreseeing?
Okay, so maybe I'll make two very quick comments. One comment is if you overlay the growth of the wind sector in the 1990s and then the growth of solar panels in the 2000s, then you overlay the graph of the hydrogen fuel cell sector growth in the past 5 years. They all line up. They're very consistent, the same trajectory. Electrolyzers for hydrogen are actually scaling up a little bit faster. So fuel cells are here. They are growing at a very steady rate. They're just growing from a small base. In terms of fuel cells, it's often thought about for transportation. And a good analogy would be to think that batteries are like exoskeletons. In nature, if creatures are small, many times as insects or crabs, they will have an exoskeleton, which are very strong. At a certain vehicle, at a certain animal size, it's hard to beat them. But as animals get bigger, almost all the animals wind up having interior skeletons, endoskeletons. They're vertebrates, whether it's cats, horses, hippos, whales. It's a very similar approach where lithium-ion batteries are absolutely fantastic. They work best in smaller vehicles or vehicles with a very limited range requirements. The larger vehicles especially, we see hydrogen and fuel cells being more advantaged, whether it's from long-haul trucking to rail cars to mining vehicles, airplanes, boats, and the like.
Fantastic. That might help address some of the critical mineral supply chain issues that Yamashita also addressed. Options.
It's portfolio approach.
And I appreciate you. You're bringing up many exoskeletons and many hard-shelled creatures in this talk today, Matthew.
Right.
So, Jeff, I know you've thought a lot about the energy crisis. I'm going to give you the last 2 or 3 minutes here to give your thoughts on that, and if it can be avoided in the future.
Okay, I'll make it quick. First thing I would say is energy transitions take time. All the scientific literature, all the history that we've been through, a number of transitions through history, they always take time, and because you're basically replacing one infrastructure with another, a whole set of institutions with others, building new things. So it takes time. So we have to be somewhat patient. Secondly, we can't just rely on renewables, as already been said. We need stable baseload power to back up renewables, whether that comes from fossil fuels or from hydro. And so it's important to remember that while we all would like to see more renewables built, the fact is that they're an intermittent source of energy. Thirdly, that's why we need an all of the above or a portfolio approach, as all the speakers have said. We need all kinds of different sources of energy in order to ensure that we have a stable, reliable energy mix and that we build resiliency, as Matthew pointed out. Fourthly, investment's important. We've seen movements against boards and companies to disinvest from upstream energy production. We've seen a big drop in investment, and particularly during the COVID-19 crisis. And now we're reaping what was sowed. As we emerge out of this, post-pandemic recovery, as we recover, we're seeing that we don't have the supply and demand just keeps on rising. So there needs to continue to be some investment in the fossil fuel sector while we continue to build capacity in the low carbon sector as well. Also, climate policy and regulation will be critical here. Fifthly, I think we should not forget about affordability, because consumers make noise and they vote. Well, at least in countries where they can vote. And so they have a say in what kind of energy mix we have. And in particular, in the developing world, affordability is critical. There is energy poverty. There are people that don't have energy. They can't turn on the lights. Kids can't study, can't get enough fuel for their stoves. So we can't expect that they're going to build, windmills and solar panels right away. They may continue to rely on things like coal and other fossil fuels for some time to come. And lastly, I would just say that geopolitics is always going to be a wild card. Who would have predicted we would be at the point we are today in Eastern Europe? And so I would just say, expect the unexpected and be prepared. And that's, again, why resiliency is so important part of energy security. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I want to thank all of our panelists for this very, again, knowledge dense and productive discussion on very important issues. I think we need to raise the sophistication of the public dialogue on this. Many of us are familiar that we're in a climate crisis, but we certainly don't want to compound that with an energy crisis and a security crisis. And yet we've been taking steps to do just that. Certainly a role for Canada and Japan and our other allies in the Indo-Pacific to collaborate and avoid the worst crisis and help ensure a non-chaotic energy transition. And I thank all of you for your very constructive comments on how we might do that. So thank you very much on behalf of Macdonald-Laurier Institute to our presenters and to our audience, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you very much, Heather.